I don't think Revelation is hard to understand. I think we've been taught to misunderstand it. What if what stands between this world right here and right now, and the one we've been promised is coming in God's word, isn't what we think? What if the obstacle isn't out there somewhere, but rather what trips us up is the way religion has shaped how we imagine that transition? This is an exploration of that shift, from understanding that seems out of reach, into something tangible, so come along if you like. There's an important thread that runs straight through the New Testament, and once we see it clearly, it just might begin to reframe what we mean by the end of things. And it almost seems to leave us begging for Jesus to give to John his prophetic vision for us. Jesus says it directly in the Gospel of Luke chapter 12, verse 2. Nothing covered will remain that way, and nothing hidden will stay hidden. A revelation. The same line is echoed in the Gospel of Matthew. And then Paul carries it inward in his first epistle to the Corinthians, what lies buried in the heart, coming into the light. And also in his epistle to the Hebrews, he presses it all the way, everything uncovered, laid bare. So that's a consistent claim of a great revealing that shows up in different voices, across different contexts in the New Testament, and it never really softens. It speaks of everything coming into the open. Now, if that is taken seriously, then we could look at the end of evil in that coming new world differently, because evil, as it operates, leans on distortion. It works through partial sight, through misdirection, through partial truths even, through the ability to present something as other than it is. It requires that rhetorical and metaphorical and sometimes philosophical space where things remain obscured. But this space is really, in essence, our disconnection from our Creator. I've talked much on that in past videos, but I'm going to try to keep this video more practical and down to earth in a sense, no matter what that old Earth's real shape is, LOL. So when deception and distortion is taken away, something fundamental shifts, because once everything is brought into the open, deception has lost its footing. Because lies, deception, and evil won't be able to move the same way anymore. It can't sustain itself across fully exposed ground. It comes apart, in essence becoming consumed. And that casts the imagery in the book of Revelation into a different kind of clarity. The adversary, the one described as the deceiver of the whole world, is shown being cast down, bound, sealed into the abyss. In Revelation 20, the lake of fire shows up at this point where everything is brought into the open. Death and Hades are thrown in, the adversary is cast in, anything tied to that old order meets the same end. Seen through this lens, that fire reads as the place where nothing can be carried forward unless it can actually hold in what is real. What belongs to distortion gives way there. What depends on concealment doesn't continue. But that scene has often been read as a kind of cosmic relocation, but it also, within an apocalyptic thread, begins to read as illustration of something more precise than just fiery imagery. The word apocalypse itself, as used in the book of Revelation, doesn't originally mean destruction, it means unveiling. A pulling back of what has covered things, so in that sense, Apocalypse names the same movement already being described. So the book of the Revelation describes deception itself, losing any place to operate, bound, because it can no longer move through what is fully seen, sealed because the environment that once carried it forward is no longer present, cast into an abyss where it has no ground to rise again. That kind of shift doesn't require a fiery pursuit. It follows naturally from exposure. When concealment collapses, what depended on it collapses with it. And once that begins to settle in, the implications widen. Because deception has never been limited to one layer of life. It runs through the inner world, motives, fears, identities built on unstable ground. It also runs outward, through systems, institutions, ways of organizing knowledge, ways of distributing power. So if a reality emerges where distortion can no longer hold, the effect doesn't stay confined to the personal. It moves outward as well. What has been hidden begins to surface. What has been suppressed finds room to stand. What has been fragmented begins to cohere. And that includes areas we often separate from spiritual language. Understanding, health, energy, economics, ways of working with the world that were obscured or sidelined when things were held together through partial sight. When clarity increases, those hidden or seemingly lost fragments can gather again, and connections that couldn't be seen begin to align again. This doesn't require imagining a sudden download of information. It can unfold as the removal of what kept things scattered, barriers dissolved. Patterns becoming visible. What was always present begins to be recognized, and that fits naturally with the language of a world being made new. A new earth, spoken of in Book of Revelation, can be understood as a reality where everything is able to stand in full coherence, where nothing needs distortion to function, where what is real at every level can remain in the open without strain. Within that kind of world, evil doesn't continue as an opposing force. It loses the condition that allowed it to operate. Its apparent strength gives way as the environment changes. And that brings the focus back inward again, because the same principle applies within a person. What has been hidden comes into view. What has been built on unstable ground begins to loosen. What is true begins to hold its shape more clearly. Over time, something gathers, a kind of internal consistency, a coherence that doesn't depend on concealment. And that is where the language of the new name finds its place, and that's probably a subject for a future video, because also in the Book of Revelation, a name is spoken of, known only to the one who receives it, written, carried openly. In that setting, a name speaks to what something is when fully revealed. So this name isn't functioning as a title added at the end. It reflects what can stand in that new kind of reality, when everything false gives way, when nothing remains hidden, when distortion no longer holds anything together. What remains becomes unmistakably clear. It doesn't come undone under exposure. It doesn't lose its shape depending on what surrounds it. It doesn't require support from illusion. It stands. And maybe that's why the vision resolves the way it does. A city descending, a reality arriving that brings everything into the open, a world where nothing needs to hide and nothing false can continue, and what remains there belongs to it. That, I think, is much closer to the eschatology God's word is pointing to, than the way we've often struggled to make sense of it. I have many other videos on all of this,